They say suburban mornings are supposed to be calm, coffee steaming, birds chirping through frost. The sound of sprinklers ticking across frozen lawns. Mine began with my wife Sarah standing on our porch in the December cold, breath fogging as she arranged a small charity table for the hospital relief fund. But then came the sharp click of high heels on ice, and she appeared, our self-proclaimed HOA queen. The Karen of all Karens, storming up the walkway with a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her voice cutting through the winter air. She ranted about non-compliant decorations and unauthorized porch usage. Before I could even speak, she crossed the line, literally stepping onto our porch without invitation, pointing in my wife's face. And then, with a vicious grin, she kicked. I saw Sarah tumble down the stairs in what felt like slow motion, her gasp cut short by the impact on the stone walkway below. Snow crunching beneath her. Rage and fear hit me at once, but training took over. Stabilize her neck, call 911, and then, with one hand trembling, I pressed a button on my sat phone. 3 minutes later, the street shook with the thunder of 5 military convoys rolling in through the December frost. When people ask why I moved into this neighborhood, I usually laugh first. On paper, it looked like a slice of the American dream, tree-lined streets dusted with early winter snow, manicured lawns going dormant under frost, a glittering lake only a few blocks away, freezing at the edges, and a promise of community harmony printed on the glossy HOA brochure. The realtor's smile could have sold sand in the desert, but I didn't need convincing. My wife Sarah and I thought it was time to settle into something quiet. After years of deployments and then years of chasing down one disaster drill after another in my work as an emergency operations contractor, I wanted stillness. Stability, a place where Sarah's patients at the hospital could send thank you cards to a real address. Not a P.O. box that changed every year. But you know what? They never tell you in those glossy brochures that behind every harmony committee lurks someone who craves power more than peace. In our case, that person was Victoria Ashford, better known, at least in my private thoughts, as HOA Karen. She wasn't president of the board. Michael Brennan technically held that role, but she might as well have been. Michael was about as firm as overcooked pasta, and Victoria had the iron grip. Her kingdom wasn't a castle. It was a 3-bedroom ranch house with plastic flowers in the yard, going brittle in the cold, and a sign that said, "Bless this home." Irony dripped from every letter. From the moment we arrived that September, Victoria had her eyes on us. Maybe it was because I didn't bow to her clipboard when she strutted by in her designer heels, or maybe because Sarah hung wind chimes on the porch that played something other than the HOA-approved Silent Breeze. Or maybe it was because we dared to be neighborly. We helped Linda Carter, our elderly neighbor, with a walker, install a small ramp so she wouldn't break her hip trying to navigate her front steps as ice formed each morning. That ramp, painted a cheerful blue, built with Tom Hayes' help from leftover lumber, was the kind of project that makes communities stronger. But Victoria saw it as graffiti on her canvas. "You're setting a bad precedent," she hissed one day in October, peering down her nose at the ramp like it was toxic waste, breath steaming in the cooling air. "If everyone does this, we'll have ramps and rails everywhere. It'll look like a hospital ward." Sarah, ever the calm voice, smiled politely and said, Better that than another ambulance call. That was the thing about Sarah. Her patience was a fortress. She spent her days in the ER juggling trauma cases and comforting families through the worst moments of their lives. Yet she always found gentleness at home. But Victoria hated that kindness. It was like holy water splashed on a vampire. She wanted conflict. She thrived on it. It wasn't just us either. Tom Hayes, a retired Marine who lived across the street, got fined for having his flagpole an unauthorized 3 inches taller than regulation. Linda was told her porch plant baskets now empty for winter-obstructed sightlines. Another neighbor was warned about his Thanksgiving lights being excessively joyful. Victoria didn't want a community. She wanted a canvas of control. And every one of us was a brushstroke she didn't approve of. At first, I kept my head down. Years in the military and emergency ops taught me the value of picking battles. You don't deploy the full arsenal when a stern word will do. I thought if I filed the right paperwork, wrote the right emails, maybe even charmed Michael with a handshake and some common sense, we could fix the small nonsense before it grew into wildfire. So when the HOA installed what they called a temporary beautification barrier across the east entrance of our street in late November, right as winter was settling in, I didn't shout. I sent a letter. The barrier was a wrought iron gate, shiny and ornamental, complete with a keypad that barely worked in the cold. It looked nice, sure, but it wasn't just cosmetic. It blocked one of the key access routes that fed into the county's emergency corridor. That wasn't just bad policy, it was dangerous. I wrote, "Dear Board, as a professional in emergency logistics, I must advise that blocking this entrance violates both county fire code and state disaster response protocols. Please remove or adjust this barrier to allow first responder access." The response, a one-line email from Victoria, "Your concern is noted." The barrier stays. I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Sent a follow-up with maps, statutes, and even a polite offer to meet in person. Again, ignored. That's when my instincts started whispering. I'd seen enough disasters to know how they always begin, not with hurricanes or fires or earthquakes, but with complacency. The barrier wasn't just a hunk of metal. It was a warning sign. And Victoria, with her smug my street, my rules attitude, was the earthquake waiting to happen. Sarah and I talked about it late at night over tea. Frost forming on the windows outside. She wanted to believe the best in people. Maybe she's just lonely, Sarah suggested, wrapping her hands around her warm mug. Power fills a gap for some folks. I shook my head. Lonely people bake cookies for neighbors. Sarah, Victoria files citations. It was around that time that Tom started nudging me. Grant, he said, one cold afternoon as we cleared leaves before the first real snow. You've got the training. You've got the contacts. You know what this barrier means. We need more than polite emails. He wasn't wrong, and yet I still hesitated. After years in uniform, you learn that escalation has consequences, and sometimes innocent people get caught in the crossfire. But in the back of my mind, the pieces were already falling into place. My work with the state gave me access to corridor planning, and I knew the Guard had a drill scheduled for late December, right around the holidays. The timing, the location, the opportunity, it all lined up. And then Victoria crossed the line further. She sent us a violation letter in early December claiming Sarah's hospital charity table, which she'd set up once before Thanksgiving, constituted unapproved commercial activity. Imagine that. A nurse raising funds for trauma equipment labeled a criminal enterprise in the kingdom of clipboard law. I looked at Sarah that night. Snow falling outside our window. Her eyes were tired. But she still smiled at me, still believed in this neighborhood. I didn't tell her the full plan forming in my head. Not yet. But I knew one thing. Sooner or later, Victoria's reign of petty terror was going to collide with something far bigger than her HOA handbook. And when it did, I'd be ready. The morning it all erupted was deceptively perfect for mid-December. A cold breeze. The kind that carries the scent of frost and distant wood smoke, drifted through the neighborhood. Pale sunlight bounced off polished SUVs lined up for the Community Yard Beautification Day, Victoria's favorite annual spectacle. Even in winter. She'd planned it like it was the coronation of a queen, complete with her marching down the sidewalks in what I'd soon see was an expensive outfit, barking orders through a megaphone she'd bought on the HOA budget. Sarah, ever the optimist, decided to use the occasion for good. She set up a small folding table at the edge of our porch, draped with a soft blue cloth, a hand-lettered sign reading, "Hospital Relief Fund, help us save lives." She had a tray of cookies, brochures, and a simple donation jar. Nothing flashy, nothing obtrusive, just kindness made tangible in the December cold. I remember looking at her as she arranged the table, her breath fogging in the winter air, morning light catching her dark hair, and thinking, this is what community should look like. And then, predictably, came the sound I'd grown to dread, the sharp click-clack of designer heels on frozen pavement. It was like the soundtrack of doom in this neighborhood. She approached fast, that familiar storm cloud gathering, and then I saw her fully for the first time that morning. Victoria Ashford was striking in a way that didn't belong at a suburban yard sale mid-50s. Composed. Expensively dressed despite the cold. She wore a crimson-red blazer that fit like it had been tailored specifically for her frame, draped open just enough to reveal a black silk top beneath the V-neck cut deep and deliberate, almost defiant against the December chill. A matching red pencil skirt with a subtle slit, paired with glossy red heels that clicked sharply against the frost-covered walkway. Her wine-brown hair fell in perfect waves just past her shoulders, and her lips glossy red. Precise, curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but a warning. She looked like someone who'd built an empire and had no intention of surrendering it to winter or reason. Unauthorized activity. She snapped before she was even on our property. Clipboard and pen poised like weapons in the cold air. She started scribbling. That crimson blazer catching the pale sunlight. This table is not compliant. Section 4.3 of the HOA regulations clearly prohibits any commercial or charitable activity without prior board approval. Sarah, ever patient, offered her one of the cookies. Breath steaming, "It's just for the hospital." Victoria, "You're welcome to donate." If kindness could melt ice, Victoria was made of titanium. She ignored the cookie and whipped out a yellow measuring tape from her designer tote bag. Snapping it open like a gunslinger in the cold, she crouched down that red skirt pulling tight and measured the distance between the table and the walkway. "Too close to the path," she muttered. Breath fogging. Obstruction hazard. And these flyers? Solicitation. Completely out of order. Neighbors began to gather, bundled in coats, some shaking their heads, others whispering into their phones. I caught Tom Hayes across the street, arms folded, jaw clenched, recording with his phone like he'd been expecting this. Breath steaming in the cold air, I stepped onto the porch, frost crunching under my boots. Victoria. This is ridiculous. It's a charity table, not a street bazaar. Nobody's obstructed. Nobody's complaining. She straightened, nostrils flaring, that crimson blazer bright against the gray December sky. Rules are rules. Mr. Sullivan, if we allow this, what's next? Garage sales every weekend? Flea markets? Chaos? Chaos. I said, is kicking an old lady's ramp off her porch. This is goodwill. That jab landed. Her eyes narrowed. She stepped closer, crossing onto my porch without invitation. Heels clicking on frozen wood. Her perfume hit me before her words did, sharp and artificial, cutting through the cold. You people think you're above the HOA, she hissed. Breath fogging between us. But in my community, everyone obeys. My community, she said. Not ours. Not the board's. Hers. The words clanged in my head like a warning bell. Sarah tried to diffuse it. Bless her heart. Victoria, please. It's just one day. It helps the hospital, helps all of us. But Victoria didn't want peace. She wanted domination. She jabbed her clipboard towards Sarah's chest. That crimson blazer sleeve moving sharply. Pack it up or face fines. Sarah stood her ground. Breath steaming. No. That single word must have detonated something inside Victoria. She let out a laugh, high-pitched, fake, echoing in the cold air, and then with a suddenness that shocked even me. She lifted her foot and shoved forward. It wasn't a stumble or an accident. It was deliberate. A kick. Time slowed. I saw Sarah's eyes widen as she lost her balance. Arms flailing. The cookie tray clattering to the frozen porch. Then she tumbled down the stairs, 4 wooden steps covered in frost, a sickening thud echoing as her body struck the stone walkway below. Snow crunching beneath her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. My heart stopped. I was at her side in 2 strides. Instincts kicking in, years of training flooding back. Sarah, don't move. I knelt, sliding my hands carefully to stabilize her neck. Cold seeping through my jeans, her breath came in shallow gasps. Eyes glassy with shock, face pale against the frost. My own pulse thundered in my ears, but my voice stayed calm, the voice drilled into me after years of triage drills. Stay with me. Sweetheart, you're okay. You're okay. Around us. Chaos erupted. Neighbors shouted. Phones recorded. Winter wind cut through the scene. Victoria stood frozen on the porch, mouth open. That crimson blazer suddenly looking garish against the horror, as if realizing for the first time the gravity of what she'd done. Michael, the spineless president, jogged over, wringing his hands, muttering, "This is... oh dear. This is... Let's all calm down." Calm down, Tom barked from across the lawn, voice cutting through the cold. She just assaulted a nurse! I barked at Michael, call 911. Now. Then I fumbled for my phone, hitting speaker as I rattled off details. Breath fogging. Adult female, late 30s. Fall down 4 porch steps. Possible spinal injury. Conscious, breathing shallow. Need, EMS, priority 1. The dispatcher's voice steadied me, but rage was boiling under my skin. I looked at Sarah's pale face against the frozen ground, and then at Victoria still clutching her clipboard like it was a shield. That crimson blazer, bright and mocking in the winter light, that's when my hand slid into my pocket. Finding the cold weight of the sat phone, a device I rarely carried. Meant for emergencies only, and this was the definition of emergency. My thumb pressed the recessed button labeled Amber 1. To the neighbors. It looked like nothing, just another phone call in the cold. But I knew what it meant. That ping traveled straight to the state's Emergency Operations Center. It meant that the ongoing National Guard drill, already scheduled, already coordinated, already planned, could be escalated into live-action response. It meant that within minutes, the barrier Victoria was so proud of would be tested not by emails, not by polite requests, but by steel, diesel, and command authority. I looked at Victoria then, standing above us in that crimson blazer, and for the first time I didn't see a tyrant. I saw a petty dictator standing on the wrong battlefield. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder through the winter air. But it wasn't just sirens. Beneath it came another sound low. Rhythmic, unmistakable. The rumble of engines. Heavy engines. 3 minutes. That's all it took. And when the ground began to shake, every single person on that frost-covered street turned their heads to see 5 military convoys rolling in. The human brain has a funny way of registering sound when adrenaline is pumping. At first, I thought the low rumble was my own heartbeat echoing in my skull, amplified by the cold. But then it grew louder, steadier, with a rhythm no body could match. The roar of diesel engines grinding up the road like an oncoming winter storm. Dozens of them. The crowd of neighbors froze. Breath steaming in the December air. Heads turned as the first olive-drab Humvee appeared through the frost. Followed by a line of transport trucks stretching as far as the eye could see. Snow dust rising from their massive tires. Their headlights cut through the pale winter sun, and the sheer weight of their presence made the frozen asphalt tremble under our feet. This wasn't a delivery truck or a parade float. This was 5 full National Guard convoys rolling straight into our HOA like Judgment Day on wheels, engines roaring, exhaust steaming in the cold air. I tightened my grip on Sarah's gloved hand, whispering, "Hold on, sweetheart. Help's here." Victoria, on the other hand, didn't look relieved. Her jaw dropped. Clipboard clutched to her chest, that crimson blazer suddenly looking absurd against the military might bearing down on us, as if she'd just realized she'd kicked the wrong beehive. What is this?" she stammered, glancing around for backup that wasn't coming. Breath fogging frantically. Michael hovered uselessly behind her, muttering something about a misunderstanding, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. The lead Humvee halted right at the so-called beautification barrier. Engine idling. Exhaust billowing white in the December air. Soldiers spilled out in full gear, boots striking frozen pavement in unison. Breath steaming. Weapons secured, but presence overwhelming. The officer in charge, a tall woman with sharp eyes and the aura of someone used to command, strode forward through the cold. I recognized her immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Cross. We'd crossed paths years ago during a statewide disaster drill. She was competent, relentless, and allergic to nonsense. She scanned the scene in seconds through the winter light, a fallen woman on the frozen ground. Neighbors recording with shaking hands. An illegal gate blocking her convoy. And one overdressed suburban tyrant standing in the middle of it all in a crimson blazer. Her voice cut the air like a blade. Breath steaming. What happened here? Deputy Martinez from the county sheriff's office, arriving just behind the convoy, cruiser lights flashing in the pale sun, jogged up and answered before Victoria could open her mouth. Assault. Civilian pushed down the stairs. Victim stable, but injured. EMS en route. And this gate, he gestured at the wrought iron monstrosity, frost clinging to its decorative bars, is blocking emergency access. Colonel Cross's eyes flicked to me, then to the sat phone still clipped at my belt. Visible beneath my open jacket, recognition flashed across her face, and her jaw tightened. Sullivan, she said curtly. Breath fogging. I should have known. You activated Amber 1. Yes. Ma'am? I replied. Barriers non-compliant. Multiple complaints ignored. My wife's down. I wasn't going to gamble on response times. She gave the smallest nod, not approval exactly, but acknowledgement that I'd played the right card in the winter air. Then she barked orders. Voice cutting through the December cold. Engineer unit prep to cut that barrier. MPs secure the scene. Medics assist EMS when they arrive. The soldiers moved like clockwork despite the cold. One squad unrolled hydraulic cutters. Sparks, ready to fly against the frost. Another cordoned off the crowd, herding gawking neighbors to the sidewalk. A medic knelt beside Sarah, slipping on gloves with steady hands. Breath steaming. The efficiency was almost beautiful, except for the fury twisting in my gut. Victoria finally found her voice. That crimson blazer catching the winter light as she stepped forward. She thrust her clipboard toward Colonel Cross like it was a badge. Breath fogging desperately. Excuse me. This is private property. You can't just barge in here. I'm vice president of this HOA, and these vehicles are not authorized. Colonel Cross didn't even blink. Breath steaming calmly. Ma'am, this is a designated emergency corridor under state statute. You've obstructed it with an unauthorized structure. Stand aside. I will not. Victoria snapped. Voice trembling, but loud. That crimson blazer bright against the gray December sky. This is my street. You people answer to me. The collective laugh that rippled through the shivering neighbors was almost enough to break the tension. Even Tom, recording from across the frost-covered lawn. Breath steaming, muttered, "Lady, you just tried to tell the U.S. Army to check in with your clipboard." Colonel Cross raised one eyebrow. Breath fogging slowly. MPs. She said calmly. Two soldiers stepped forward, towering over Victoria like statues come to life. Breath steaming in formation. Ma'am, move aside, or you will be physically removed. For the first time, Victoria faltered. That crimson blazer no longer commanding in the winter light. Her eyes darted between the soldiers, the cutting torch sparking at the frozen gate, and the cluster of phones recording her every twitch in the cold. But pride is a stubborn disease. She planted her heels, red shoes clicking on ice, and shouted, "This is harassment! I'll fine every one of you! I'll sue!" The MPs didn't budge. Breath, steaming steadily. Neither did Cross. And then, with a hiss and a shower of sparks cutting through the December air, the engineers sliced through the barrier's locking mechanism, metal groaning, frost shattering. Steam rising as torches met frozen iron. The gate screeched as it was forced open metal, protesting before giving way entirely. Snow falling from its decorative bars. The convoy engines roared back to life, trucks lumbering forward through exhaust clouds, reclaiming the emergency corridor as if it had never been blocked. Tires crunching through frost. The sight was biblical in the winter light, 5 convoys stretching down the street. Olive drab giants rolling past cookie-cutter houses with white fences and frozen hedges. Exhaust steaming. Snow swirling in their wake. Neighbors filmed with open mouths, some cheering quietly under their breath. Cold forgotten in the spectacle. For once, Victoria's clipboard was powerless against the winter and the steel. Sarah groaned softly, pulling me back to her side on the frozen ground. The medic reassured me. Breath fogging, stable vitals. Possible concussion, but we'll let the hospital confirm. EMS is 2 minutes out. I kissed her cold forehead. Fury and relief swirling together. "You're safe now," I whispered. When I looked up, Victoria was still sputtering that crimson blazer, suddenly looking cheap in the harsh winter reality, but the tide had turned. The crowd wasn't with her anymore. They'd seen too much. Her kick. Her arrogance. Her attempt to stop literal soldiers from doing their jobs in an emergency. The illusion of power had cracked like ice under boots. Colonel Cross turned back to me, breath steaming. "We'll file the incident report with the county attorney. Everything's on record. You'll testify?" "Gladly," I said, voice flat with certainty. Breath fogging. Cross nodded once more, then addressed the shivering crowd. "For the record, obstruction of emergency access is a criminal offense. If anyone else was complicit in erecting this barrier, now would be the time to come forward." Michael looked like he wanted to sink into the frozen ground. He raised a trembling hand, breath fogging desperately. I didn't know. Victoria said it was decorative. Save it for the county." Cross snapped. Victoria's face twisted. That crimson blazer seeming to lose its color in the winter light. She shrieked, "You're all against me! This is a conspiracy! I am this community!" But the soldiers weren't listening anymore, just methodically securing the scene. Breath steaming. Boots crunching on frost. Neither were the neighbors. Bundled in their coats, phones still recording, the convoys kept rolling through the December cold, reclaiming the road. Victoria thought she owned exhaust clouds billowing, snow swirling, diesel thunder echoing, and with each truck that passed her in the winter air, her range shrank, smaller and smaller. And in that moment, standing in the December cold, with Sarah being carefully loaded into the warm ambulance, I knew the game had changed the second the convoy secured the road through the December frost. The scene shifted from chaos to choreography. You could practically see the invisible lines being drawn across our frozen cul-de-sac. One side run by people who knew what command meant, the other by a woman clutching a clipboard like it was Excalibur. That crimson blazer, bright but powerless against the winter and the law. Lieutenant Colonel Cross wasted no time. breath steaming as she barked orders. Command post here. MPs. Perimeter. Engineers document the barrier remains. Medics coordinate with EMS when they arrive. Her voice cracked like a whip through the cold air. Soldiers fanned out despite the chill, establishing zones with fluorescent cones that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, orange bright against gray snow. Radios squawked. Engines idled in steady rhythm. Exhaust billowing white. I'd seen it before on deployments and disaster drills. The speed at which order blooms from confusion when professionals take over in any weather. It was beautiful. Even as my heart was still split between rage and worry for Sarah, who lay strapped to a backboard now. A paramedic assessing her with calm efficiency in the cold. Deputy Martinez stepped up beside Cross, notebook in hand. Body cam light blinking red. Breath fogging. We're treating this as assault and obstruction of emergency access. He said flatly. Copy that. Cross replied. Already scanning a tablet despite the cold, the corridor maps I'd sent her office weeks before pulled up on screen. She turned to me. Breath steaming. Sullivan. I need your documentation. All of it. I pulled a folder from my go bag. I always carry one. Habit you don't shake after years in operations. Inside were printed emails, statutory codes, photos of the barrier from multiple angles through different seasons, time-stamped letters I'd sent to the HOA board. I handed it over like a soldier offering ammunition. Frost crunching under our boots. Cross flipped through. Jaw tightening. Breath fogging as she read. They ignored all of this. She muttered. Every word. Mitch rubber-stamped whatever Victoria wanted. I said. I warned them about this exact scenario. Cross muttered something under her breath I won't repeat, then snapped her fingers at an aide. Exhaust clouds drifting past. Scan these. Forward to county legal and the state office. Meanwhile, Victoria was gathering herself for another round despite the December cold. She stomped forward, heels clicking on frost. That crimson blazer catching pale winter light. Breath fogging angrily, clipboard raised like a holy relic. Excuse me, you cannot establish a command post on HOA grounds without authorization from the board. This is private property. You are trespassing. The MP closest to her didn't even blink. Breath steaming calmly. Ma'am, step back behind the perimeter. I am the perimeter, she screeched. Voice echoing in the cold air. That crimson blazer trembling with rage. Deputy Martinez chuckled darkly. Breath fogging. Lady, I hate to break it to you, but state law outranks your HOA bylaws. Obstruction of an emergency corridor is a misdemeanor at best, felony at worst. And that kick you delivered? That's assault. Plain and simple. Her face flushed, beet red, despite the cold. She jabbed a manicured finger toward me, that crimson blazer sleeve moving sharply. He's making this up! He set me up! This is harassment! I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I just stared her down through the winter air and said, You did this to yourself. Victoria. And it's all on video. That was the kicker. Half the neighbors had their phones pointed at her through the cold. Recording every outburst, breath, steaming, fingers trembling. But cameras steady. Tom Hayes, in particular, was narrating like a war correspondent through his fogging breath. And here, ladies and gentlemen, We see the Queen of Citations facing the full might of the United States military in sub-freezing temperatures. Will her clipboard prevail? Even some of the soldiers cracked smiles. Breath steaming. Colonel Cross didn't. She pointed directly at Victoria, breath fogging authoritatively. Ma'am, your obstruction has already been documented. If you continue interfering, you will be detained. You can't detain me! Victoria's voice cracked in the cold. I'm vice president of this HOA. Cross raised an eyebrow so sharp it could have cut frozen steel, breath steaming slowly. Not exactly a federal position. Ma'am? Neighbors snickered despite the cold. Bundled in their coats, Michael buried his face in his gloved hands. At that moment, the EMS ambulance screeched into the neighborhood siren, fading as it stopped. Exhaust billowing in the December air, paramedics rushed to Sarah, conferring quickly with the guard medic already stabilizing her, breath steaming as they worked efficiently in the cold. They lifted her carefully into the warm rig, blankets wrapped, neck brace secure. I squeezed her cold hand as they wheeled her away. I'll be right behind you, I promised. Breath fogging between us, she gave me the faintest smile before the doors closed. Warm air escaping into the December cold. My chest ached watching her go, but I knew the show here wasn't over yet. With Sarah safe in professional hands, I turned back to the frozen battlefield. Inspector Wallace from the city arrived next clipboard of his own. But unlike Victoria's, his actually mattered. He snapped photos of the barrier through the cold. Breath steaming, shook his head. This is a code violation on 6 different levels, he muttered. Camera clicking, blocking ADA access, fire lane obstruction, no construction permit. He glanced up at Victoria, frost clinging to his glasses. Who authorized this? She puffed out her chest. That crimson blazer catching winter light. I did. As vice president, I have full authority. Wallace cut her off, breath fogging sharply. You had no authority. This is coming down today. The color drained from Michael's face despite the cold. He stammered, gloved hands wringing, but the board voted. Then the board violated the law. Wallace said flatly, breath steaming, and the fines will reflect that. I almost felt sorry for Michael. Almost he'd been a puppet, and the strings were showing now frozen and brittle in the December air. Meanwhile, Cross was already drafting her incident log on the tablet despite the cold. Gloved fingers moving efficiently, she turned to me again. Breath fogging. Sullivan, your sat phone ping will be included in the drill report. This entire event now transitions from exercise to live incident. Congratulations, you've officially proven your point. There was no sarcasm in her tone through the winter air. If anything, it was respect mixed with grim satisfaction. I nodded, breath steaming. Didn't want it proven like this, but I'll take it. Victoria, however, wasn't finished despite the cold. She marched right up to Cross through the frost, that crimson blazer bright and defiant, waving her clipboard. Breath fogging desperately. I demand that all these vehicles leave immediately. You are lowering property values and scaring residents. Cross stepped so close, their breath mingled in the frozen air between them. Voice dropping to a growl. You lowered property values the second you assaulted a woman on her own porch. Now stand down before I have you cuffed. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the winter wind seemed to pause. Even Victoria, queen of noise, had no comeback. She sputtered, opened her mouth, and then closed it again, that crimson blazer suddenly seeming to deflate in the cold. For once, her clipboard failed her. As the convoys rolled slowly through the now cleared corridor, exhaust steaming, snow swirling, engines rumbling, neighbors whispered and filmed despite trembling fingers, sending clips that would go viral before sundown. Some looked at me with newfound respect through the cold, others with gratitude. And Victoria, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Diminished, not by me, but by the truth, finally catching up. That crimson blazer no longer commanding in the harsh December reality. I exhaled slowly, breath fogging white. The war wasn't over yet, but the battlefield had shifted. And this time, Victoria was fighting uphill with nothing but paper and pride against steel and law and winter, and I knew which side wins that fight. I've seen a lot of takedowns in my time: drug raids, disaster audits, supply chain investigations, but nothing prepared me for the absurdity of watching a suburban HOA unravel under the glare of body cams and receipts in the December cold. It wasn't bombs or bullets that were about to crush Victoria's empire. It was paperwork and winter and consequences. And believe me, paperwork cuts sharper than steel when you've spent years hiding behind a clipboard, especially when frost makes your fingers shake. Deputy Martinez was the first to shift gears. Breath steaming as he flicked on his body cam, he pointed a steady finger at Victoria, standing there in that crimson blazer, shivering slightly now. Ma'am, this device is recording. For the record, state your full name and your position with the HOA. Her chin lifted despite the cold. Victoria Ashford, Vice President of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association. And I demand that you cease this harassment immediately. Martinez's lips twitched, like he was trying not to laugh. Breath fogging. Noted. Now, for the record, witnesses have reported you physically assaulted Mrs. Sarah Sullivan, resulting in injury. Do you deny this? Victoria blustered, that crimson blazer trembling. It was an accident. She tripped. Tom Hayes' voice cut through the December air like a bayonet. I've got the whole thing on video. You kicked her. And just like that, half a dozen phones went up, screens glowing in the winter light as neighbors replayed the clip in real time despite cold fingers. The sound was unmistakable, the sharp thud of Victoria's heel connecting, the gasp from Sarah. The collective cry of shock echoing in the cold. One neighbor even had slow-motion footage, breath steaming as he held up his phone. Martinez leaned in. Breath fogging. Looks intentional to me. Victoria's face went chalk white. Even the cold couldn't explain it. Meanwhile, Inspector Wallace was building his own case in the December air. He crouched by the barrier's remains, snapping photos, breath steaming as he muttered code violations like a grim mantra. No permit. Wrong materials. Blocking ADA pathway. Fire code breach. Unlicensed contractor work. He paused and glanced at me, frost clinging to his clipboard. You said you've emailed the board about this? I nodded. Breath fogging. 3 times. Ignored every time. He pulled a tablet from his bag, fingers clumsy in the cold, and logged into the city's permit database. A few taps later, His brows shot up despite the winter chill. Interesting. The official application for this gate lists a contractor by the name of Ashford Landscaping. I nearly laughed. Breath steaming. Ashford? As in her cousin. Wallace confirmed, holding up the screen through the cold. LLC filed last year. No license on record. Looks like a shell company. The neighbors gasped audibly. Breath fogging in unison. Tom muttered through the winter air, "Oh, she's done." Colonel Cross crossed her arms. Breath, steaming authoritatively. So funds meant for HOA maintenance went into a family member's pocket? Wallace nodded grimly. Frost forming on his glasses. Classic self-dealing. That's fraud, if proven. And the hits kept coming, despite the December cold. One of Cross's aides approached with a tablet showing fresh footage from the guards' vehicle dash cams recording in the winter light. The entire scene had been captured in high-definition clarity, Victoria yelling through fogging breath. The barrier blocking the convoy. The sparks as engineers cut it open in the December air. Cross smirked as she reviewed it. Breath steaming. Congratulations. Miss Ashford, you're starring in a training video on what not to do? Victoria snapped. That crimson blazer catching winter light sharply. This is outrageous. You people are conspiring against me. I'll sue every one of you. Martinez held up a citation slip like a magician, revealing his final trick. Breath fogging. Ma'am? You're already facing charges of assault and obstruction. Keep talking, and I'll add disorderly conduct. Michael, the hapless president, finally broke through the cold. He wrung his gloved hands. Sweat, somehow still staining his collar despite the December chill. Please. Victoria. Stop. We can't keep this up. They've got evidence. Shut up. Mitch. Victoria hissed through chattering teeth. That crimson blazer no longer as imposing. You're useless. For once, Michael found a shred of backbone despite the cold. He turned to Martinez. Breath fogging desperately. I'll cooperate. I have the HOA's financial records at home. I'll hand them over. You could almost hear the collective gasp through the December air. Victoria whirled on him, heels slipping slightly on Frost. That crimson blazer spinning. You traitor. But Michael wasn't done. His voice shook from cold and fear. But the words were firm. I didn't sign up for this. I thought it was about keeping lawns neat, not laundering money. She pushed us all into it. I don't want to go down with her. The crowd erupted, despite the cold neighbors whispering through fogging breath. Some filming with trembling fingers. Others shouting things like, "We knew it, and you'll pay for this." Beverly, Deputy Martinez radioed for backup. Breath steaming. Possible financial crimes investigation. Secure HOA records as soon as possible. Wallace scribbled notes furiously despite the cold. Frost forming on his pen. City will issue an emergency order to dissolve this barrier and audit all association expenditures. Colonel Cross, never one for theatrics, even in winter closed her logbook. Breath fogging authoritatively. From this moment, this neighborhood is under joint jurisdiction until the corridor is certified safe. Miss Ashford, you're relieved of whatever authority you think you had. That was the breaking point in the December air. Victoria screamed, voice cracking through the cold, throwing her clipboard to the frozen pavement. Papers scattered like confetti at a nightmare parade. Snow swirling around them. She lunged toward me through the winter air. That crimson blazer flapping, finger stabbing desperately. "This is your fault! You did this! You brought them here!" I met her glare head on, breath fogging calmly between us. "You're right. I did, and I'd do it again." The MPs stepped between us, firm but calm, breath steaming in formation. Victoria's tirade dissolved into shrieks about conspiracies, property values, secret plots, but nobody was listening anymore through the December cold. The spell was broken in the winter air. The Queen had no crown, only a clipboard that now lay crushed under an MP's boot, half buried in snow. As the convoys rumbled in formation through the frost exhaust, billowing white, snow swirling in their wake, the message was clear, even in the December chill. The HOA's reign of fear had ended not with a vote, not with a meeting, but with the undeniable weight of truth, law, and steel cutting through winter air. For years, she'd hidden behind bylaws and petty fines, but against body cams, receipts, and the unified force of neighbors who'd had enough. Even in sub-freezing temperatures, her empire crumbled in broad December daylight. And I realized then, standing in the cold, that this wasn't just about Sarah or me. It was about every person Victoria had bullied, every neighbor she'd find, every kindness she'd tried to stomp out. The clipboard queen was finished, frozen out by justice and winter alike. Most of my neighbors thought what happened that December morning was some wild stroke of fate, like the universe had finally gotten tired of Victoria's antics and sent 5 military convoys through the frost to put her in her place. I could see it in their faces, despite the cold. Awe, disbelief, even a kind of giddy joy. But as I stood there in the winter air watching Victoria scream herself hoarse while soldiers documented every inch of the crime scene, I knew better. It wasn't luck, it was design. Weeks before this explosion, back when November frost was just starting, Sarah and I had already seen the storm clouds gathering. Every ignored email, every bogus citation, every time Victoria flexed her false authority through the cooling autumn, it all told me the HOA wasn't just petty. It was dangerous. That barrier was the final straw in late November. I'd spent too many years drafting corridor maps and running disaster simulations to shrug it off. I knew what it meant. Blocked ambulances, delayed fire trucks, lives lost. And Victoria, in her arrogance, didn't care. So I decided to make her care. Sarah was the one who nudged me into it. One cold night over tea, frost forming on the windows, she rubbed her temples and said, "If they won't listen to words, maybe they'll listen to consequences." That's all it took. I pulled out my old contacts and made a few calls through November's chill. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Cross, for one. We'd worked together on an earthquake readiness drill a few years back, and I knew she respected planning over politics. I pitched her the idea over the phone. Watching snow start to fall outside, run the upcoming guard drill straight through our neighborhood. Stress test the corridor. Document everything. Cross didn't commit at first. Protocols and politics always tangled these things up. But when I explained about the barrier and how the HOA had ignored 3 separate warnings as winter approached, her tone shifted through the phone line. "You're telling me there's a community so arrogant they'd block a state emergency route?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you have documentation?" I sent her the emails, the maps, the photos, all time-stamped from September through November. 10 minutes later, she called back, her voice crisp. "All right, Sullivan, we'll route it your way, but if this goes live, it's on you." I smiled through the November cold. Breath fogging. That's the point. The sat phone ping wasn't some panic button pulled out of desperation in the December morning. It was part of the plan, a test within a test. If an incident occurred, say an assault, a medical emergency, anything serious, the drill could be escalated to real-time response. And when Victoria kicked Sarah down those frost-covered stairs, I didn't hesitate. The plan kicked into gear like clockwork in the December cold, watching Cross command her troops through the winter air. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction despite the circumstances. The timing had been perfect, Sarah stabilized by professionals. The barrier cut open for all to see in the December light, Victoria exposed in the harshest winter reality imaginable, and all of it documented not just by neighbors with smartphones through the cold, but by the guard, the sheriff's department, city inspectors, and county legal. As the convoy continued its slow march through the frost-covered corridor, Cross came over to me, breath steaming. Her voice was low, but sharp through the winter air. "You planned this, didn't you?" I met her eyes. Breath fogging between us. I planned for accountability. The assault, that part wasn't planned. I glanced toward the ambulance carrying Sarah away through the December cold. My voice hardened, but it proves the point better than any drill could. She studied me for a moment through the winter light, then nodded, breath steaming. "You know, Sullivan, sometimes it takes people like you, people willing to make noise, to force the system to pay attention." Noise. That was one word for it. To me, it was more like justice. With an engine roar cutting through December air, word of the plan spread quickly among the shivering neighbors. Tom cornered me, breath fogging, eyes wide with admiration. "You mean to tell me this whole convoy thing wasn't luck? You set it up? Not just me." I said through the cold. Sarah, too. She coordinated with the hospital's disaster prep wing. We knew if we could line up the right day, the right drill, the right trigger, Victoria's kingdom would collapse under its own weight. Tom whistled low. Breath steaming, that's not just revenge. That's strategy. I shrugged despite the December chill. Revenge is messy. Accountability is clean. Meanwhile, more damning evidence trickled in through the winter afternoon. Wallace pulled up HOA emails forwarded by Michael in a desperate bid to save himself, fingers trembling from cold and fear. One from Victoria to the board read, "Our street, our rules. Outsiders must be slowed or discouraged. The gate will ensure we maintain control." Another bragged, "No one will question us if we find consistently fear keeps people compliant." When those words hit the December daylight, the crowd erupted in fury despite the cold. Even neighbors who'd been silent before now stepped forward through the frost, shouting their grievances. Breath fogging angrily, one elderly man shook his cane through the winter air, yelling, "She fined me for my grandson's chalk drawings." Chalk. Another mom shouted through the cold, "She told my kid's wheelchair ramp was a visual offense. It washed away in November rain." Years of resentment pouring out all at once in the December air, a flood melting the frozen silence. And standing in the center of it all, Victoria looked smaller and smaller through the winter light, her power dissolving faster than snow in March. That crimson blazer no longer commanding but pathetic against the cold reality. Deputy Martinez smirked, breath steaming. Looks like the neighborhood finally found its voice. Cross closed her logbook through the December chill, and it'll have a new one once this is over. Interim receivership. County oversight. Maybe even dissolution if the audit pans out. Victoria's shriek split the frozen air. "You can't dissolve my HOA." "No," Cross said coolly. Breath, fogging. "But the state can." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, watching it steam white in the December air. The plan had worked despite the cold. It hadn't erased Sarah's pain or undone the fall, but it had shown the truth in the harshest winter light. Victoria wasn't a queen. She was a petty tyrant exposed under floodlights she couldn't dim, not even with December darkness falling early. And the best part? It wasn't me who toppled her through the winter cold. It was the system she thought she controlled, frozen solid by law and accountability. As the last convoy truck rolled through the neighborhood in the fading December light engines, growling like thunder, exhaust steaming white, snow swirling in their wake, I felt a strange calm settle over me despite the cold. Not victory. Something deeper. Closure. And I knew, even as Victoria howled at the winter sky, that her reign was finished, frozen out by justice and December alike. The days that followed felt like waking up in a different neighborhood through the December cold one that had been hiding behind a mask of frost and finally tore it off. For years, Victoria had wielded her clipboard like a weapon through every season, issuing fines for everything from lawn ornaments to porch paint. But once the convoys left and the county took over in the winter chill, her empire collapsed like ice in spring thaw. Deputy Martinez filed the assault report the same afternoon, breath still steaming in the cold. The sheriff's office officially charged Victoria with misdemeanor assault and obstruction of emergency access. Watching her being escorted into the back of a patrol car, heels clicking against frozen pavement, that crimson blazer suddenly looking cheap under harsh December light, face twisted in outrage, was surreal. She kept shouting about civil rights violations and lawsuits through the winter air, but her voice was drowned out by the click of cameras and the low buzz of neighbors whispering in the cold. Finally, Michael, the president in name only, resigned within 48 hours through an email sent late that December night. His letter, taped sheepishly to the frost-covered HOA bulletin board the next morning, read like a confession. "I allowed myself to be pressured into decisions that hurt this community. I regret not standing up sooner." It was the first honest thing I'd seen him write. The county attorney stepped in quickly as winter settled deeper, announcing that the HOA's finances were under audit. Rumors spread fast through the December cold. Embezzled landscaping funds, shell invoices, beautification projects that lined Victoria's cousins' pockets while snow piled up on neglected sidewalks. For once, the neighbors weren't afraid of speaking out despite the chill. They formed small knots in the cul-de-sac, bundled in coats, trading stories of fines, harassment, intimidation breath steaming as secrets spilled. Things that had festered quietly through autumn now burst out into December daylight. And through it all, Sarah, my Sarah, was recovering in the hospital's warm rooms. The doctors confirmed no permanent spinal damage, just bruised ribs, a mild concussion, and more soreness than anyone deserved. She wore a neck brace for a week, rolling her eyes whenever I fussed too much, frost forming on the hospital windows as I sat beside her. Grant, she told me one evening as snow fell outside, "You can't bubble wrap me. I'm tougher than you think." I smiled, brushing a stray hair from her face. Warmth a stark contrast to the December cold outside. I never doubted it. But forgive me for wanting to keep you safe. She leaned against my shoulder. Voice soft but steady. You did more than that. You kept this whole community safe. You drew a line. The line stayed drawn through the December cold within a month. As snow piled higher, the county placed the HOA under interim receivership. Meetings that used to feel like tribunals now turned into gatherings of neighbors, planning real improvements through the winter, repairing Linda's ramp properly before ice made it deadly, organizing snow removal for elderly residents, even setting up a neighborhood watch led by Tom Hayes. The atmosphere was different, lighter, freer, despite the December chill. For the first time since moving in, I felt like we weren't tenants in Victoria's frozen kingdom, but actual members of a community warming from within. Victoria, of course, tried to claw her way back through December's darkness from her lawyer's office. She sent letters threatening defamation suits against anyone who spoke out, but those letters didn't land like they used to. People didn't cower. They laughed. One neighbor taped hers to a mailbox in the snow with a sticky note that read, "Return to sender. We don't scare easy anymore." The new board election came faster than expected in early January. As winter deepened, I was nominated by half the neighborhood, but I declined through the cold. I've spent enough of my life in command posts. I told them, breath steaming, it's your turn to lead. Instead, I endorsed a slate of practical, reasonable neighbors, people who cared more about clearing ice from sidewalks than hedge height. They won in a landslide. Tom cornered me afterward, grinning despite the January cold. You sure you don't want the power? Grant? I shook my head. Breath fogging. Power isn't the point. Accountability is. And besides, I've got my hands full keeping Sarah from baking cookies for every soldier who drove a convoy through here. He laughed, clapped me on the shoulder through our winter coats. Fair enough. The last I saw of Victoria was at a county hearing as snow fell outside, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear as inspectors laid out violations and auditors read line after line of suspicious transactions in the warm courtroom. She didn't look like a queen anymore. She looked small. And maybe that was justice enough even in winter. Life returned to normal as December turned to January, or as close to normal as it ever gets, in a place where 5 military convoys once rolled down your snow-covered street. But whenever I hear the low rumble of engines in the distance through the winter air, I smile. Not because of the chaos they brought, but because of the order they restored. And every time I sit on that porch with Sarah, porch repaired, ramp freshly painted despite the cold, neighbors waving as they walk by, bundled against January wind, I remember that some battles aren't fought with fists or guns. They're fought with patience, with planning, and with the courage to press a button when the moment comes, even in December, cold. For us, that moment came 3 minutes after a kick, and it changed everything. Looking back through the winter months, what happened in Pinecrest wasn't just a clash between one woman and a community. It was a reminder of something bigger, something that holds true even in the coldest December. Power only lasts as long as people allow it. Victoria thrived on silence, on neighbors too scared or tired to fight back through the cold. The clipboard only worked because everyone treated it like a sword. But the second we pushed back with truth, with evidence, with solidarity, even through frost and snow, it turned into scrap paper. In life, bullies come in many forms, despite the season. Sometimes they wear suits and sit behind desks. Sometimes they wear badges, and sometimes they hide behind bylaws and claim to be protecting property values while winter freezes the vulnerable. But their power is only paper thin when faced with persistence and unity strong enough to melt December ice. I learned that accountability isn't about revenge, it's about protecting the future. Even through winter's harshest cold. Sarah's fall could have been so much worse. But because we stood our ground, because we documented, planned, and refused to be silenced, even as December frost tried to freeze our resolve, our neighborhood is safer now. So if you take anything from our story, let it be this. Don't ignore the small injustices, not even in winter's darkness. Speak up. Document everything. Find allies. And when the time comes, don't be afraid to press your own version of the Amber One button, even if your fingers are frozen. Because justice doesn't wait for spring. It comes when you call it through snow, through frost, through December cold. And sometimes, it arrives in 5 convoys with engines that shake the frozen earth.